In a momentary calm, blades are sworn together, vowing to bring about the restoration of peace and order. The year is 190, and the Han Empire falters on the brink of destruction. Brought low by corrupt eunuchs, and strong-armed by the despot Dong Zhuo. The fires of war erupt across a once peaceful realm. In the growing chaos, rebellions rise, and the Emperor's voice is drowned out by the tyrant's roar. The land suffers. Yet though they band together against a common foe, such a fragile alliance cannot hold forever.
The camp had been raised on a dual-alloy raft, 20 meters square, held above the water by locked, cycling repulsor lift pods. Angular, geometric, the structure the raft supported looked like a giant tent, but I realized from its gentle shimmer that it was formed from intersecting fields of opaque force energy. We went in through the one-way field membrane that formed the door and entered a cool, climate-controlled chamber lit by glow globes. Equipment was stacked up in metal containers, and there were several items of collapsible furniture. Further screens denoted adjoining rooms, veiled off. A grey-haired man in a linen robe was working at a small camp table, reviewing data on a portable codifier. Kara unfolded 3 more of the stacked camp chairs, while Harlan fetched bottles of chilled fruit water and some shrink-wrapped ration packs. A young woman came in from one of the other rooms and conferred quietly with the man at the codifier. "You're busy here, I see," I said. "Yes," said Ravana. "The view should be good." I didn't quite understand what he meant, but I let it pass. There were other things on my mind. Harlan thumb-popped the cap of a bottle and passed it to me before taking his seat. "Here's to us all, still alive despite the odds." He clinked his bottle against mine, and Kara toasted with hers. "Well," I said. "A bunch of hard-ass merc bastards smoked the distaff. Took the whole spire out. Killed the lot of them," Harlan said, matter-of-factly, but there was still an edge of rage in his voice. "And you?" "Madame Bequin saved us," said Kara. "What?" "We got her back to Messina, okay? Stable," said Kara. "The Medicaid facility at the distaff hall made her comfortable. They got me back on my feet in about a week. Then Madame Bequin suddenly took a turn for the worse." "She stroked out," growled Harlan. "A really bad, what's it called?" "Cerebrovascular ischemia," Ravana said quietly. "It was beyond the abilities or resources of the hall's Medicaid, so we rushed her to Sanders Cedar Municipal General for surgery," said Kara. "We knew you wouldn't want us to leave her there alone, so we stayed with her in shifts. I took one watch and alternated with Nail. On the night the hall was raided, I had just started my shift." "And I was on my way back to Spire 11 in an air cab," finished Harlan. "So neither of you were there?" "No." "You two and Elizabeth all survived?" "Lucky us, eh?" said Harlan. "Where is she?" I asked. "And how is she?" "Never regained consciousness. She's on vital support in my ship's infirmary," Ravana replied. "My personal physician is tending her." I knew Dr. Antrobus, Gideon's Medicaid. Bequin couldn't be in more experienced hands. I looked back at Harlan and Kara. I could tell the Loki-born ex-bounty hunter was enjoying stringing this tale out. He'd probably been rehearsing it for weeks. So, go on.
We went to ground, me and Kara. We couldn't move Madam B, so we signed her in under a fake identity so she couldn't be linked to your operation. Then me and Kara went hunting. We caught up with the hit squad at a shantytown lift port down in the suburbs. 30 of them. Besserine Janissaries, no less. Never tangled with those brothers before, though I'd heard of them, of course. Now, could they fight like bastards?
I've seen them up close.
Then you'll appreciate that 2 against 30, even with the drop to us, was hardball. I smoked 3 of them.
2, corrected Kara. It was 2.
Okay, 2 definites and a probable. Kara made the Emperor bless it, took out 6 of the pigs. Blam, blam, blam.
We can split a bottle of Amasec while you give me a play-by-play later, Nail. Stick to the meat.
My family motto, Chief.
Harlan grinned.
Well, as it turned out, me and Kara had probably bitten off a sight more than we could chew, and we ended up cornered in a freight yard next to the lift port. Backs to the wall time. Last stand. A change of underwear moment. And then, just like that,
he clicked his fingers.
Salvation arrived.
He looked over at Inquisitor Ravener. Just glad I was able to help, Ravener demurred.
Help? Him and his kill team kicked ass. Far as I could tell, only 8 of the mercs got out alive, jumped their ship, and ran off-world.
I set my empty bottle down on the duralloy floor and sat forward with my elbows on my knees. So, Gideon, I said, how in the name of terror did you come to be there on Messina at the right time?
I wasn't,
he said.
I was there at the wrong time. If I'd reached Messina a day earlier, I'd have been there at the right time. But my ship was delayed by a warp storm that also shut down my communications.
That's the second time since I arrived you've been enigmatic, I said. Is that any way to treat your old master? Gideon Ravener had been my interrogator and pupil back in the late 330s, the most promising inquisitorial candidate I had ever met. A level Delta latent psyker with a PQ of 171, he had also possessed a genius intellect rounded out with a fine education and an athlete's physique. During the Holy Novena on Thracian Primaris, he had been caught up in the infamous atrocity, and his body had been woefully crippled. Since that time, he had lived within the cocoon of his force chair, a brilliant mind sustained within a paralyzed, useless frame. But that had not stopped him from becoming one of the Inquisition's finest agents. I myself had sponsored his promotion to full Inquisitor status in 346. Since then, he had successfully prosecuted hundreds of cases, the most notable being the Gomek violation, and, of course, the Servan-Holman affair on Sarum. He had also penned several works of considerable insight. The celebrated essays Towards an Imperial Utopia, Reflections on the Hive State, and Terra Redux, a history of the early Inquisition. A study of warpcraft that was fast becoming a standard primer, and a work called The Mirror of Smoke that dealt with man's interaction with the warp state with such conspicuous perception and poetry that I believed it would survive as much as art as it was instruction. Ravener was all but invisible within the dim globe of his chair's field, just a shapeless shadow suspended in the fizzling gloom. His body was utterly redundant, and everything he did was performed by Psi-Force alone. His mind had grown stronger in his infirmity, compensating for the things denied him. I was sure he was now much more than a level Delta psionic. My work in the last few years has required me to develop an understanding of divination and prophecy, Gideon said slowly. Things have been revealed to me. Things of great significance. I could tell he was being very careful about what he said. It was as if he wished to tell me more, but didn't dare. I decided I should respect his caution and allow him to tell me only what he felt he could. One of those revelations, a vision if you like, forecast that a violent fate would befall the distaff on Messina. The event was predicted to the precise hour, but I couldn't get there in time to prevent it. The destruction of the distaff was predicted, I said. With distressing accuracy, he replied. I suddenly realized I was hearing his voice, by which I mean the voice Ravener had used before his terrible injuries, a voice produced by a man whose mouth and larynx had not been melted by burning promethium. I had become so used to the monotonous synthetic speech of his chair's psi-activated voxponder.
My work has also allowed me to perfect stronger psionic abilities,
he said, and one of them was clearly reading my surface thoughts.
I ditched the voxponder about a year ago. I have developed enough psionic control to broadcast my speech naturally.
I'm hearing you in my head.
Yes, Gregor. Hearing the voice you're used to. It doesn't work with untouchables or psychically shielded individuals, of course.
That's why I keep the old voxponder on standby. He uttered the last part of his sentence mechanically, via the toneless voice box built into his chair, and the grating, emotion-free electronic words made us all laugh with surprise.
Though I was too late to save the distaff, I got Kara, Harlan, and Elizabeth to safety off-world.
For that you have my gratitude. But why summon me so far off the beaten track to meet with you?
Promedy has secrets that we need, he said.
What manner of secrets?
I have been allowed to see the future, Gregor,
Ravener said.
And it isn't pretty. Imperial culture has never set much store by divination, Gideon told me. I have come to suspect this is a great weakness.
It was much later. Night had fallen over the swampy bayou, and the air was dancing with bioluminescent flies. Ravener and I had taken a stroll along the grav walks behind his camp. A weakness? Surely it is a greater weakness to take it seriously. If we believe the rantings of every dribbling marketplace seer, of every demented ecclesiarchy prophet who claimed to have been granted divine revelations, we would be mad, true. Most of it is rubbish, lies, mischief, the delusions of broken minds. Sometimes prophetic insights are genuine, but they are usually made by psychers who have either done it by accident or who are insane. In either case, the visions are untrustworthy or too confused to be interpreted in any practical, useful way. But just because mankind isn't very good at it doesn't mean it can't be done. It is my understanding that other races are reputed to excel at it, I said. That has certainly been my experience, he replied. Serving the Ordo Xenos has been enlightening. The more I have studied alien races in order to discern their weaknesses, the more I have learned their strengths. We are talking about the Eldar, aren't we? I risked the question. He didn't reply immediately. His last words had been close to heresy. The force sphere around him flickered slightly with anxiety. They are a strange breed. They are able to read the invisible geography of space-time and unravel probability with great precision. But they are mercurial. Sometimes they use their insight as a lever to change the outcome of events. Sometimes they stand idle and watch as prophecies play out. I believe there is no human alive who could explain why they make the choices they do. We just don't see things the way they do. Their greater lifespan gives them greater perspective. It's partly that. Although orthodox thinking would say that greater perspective is their curse. The Ministorum believes the Eldar are too resigned to destiny, that they are indolent and almost cruel, or else brutally manipulative. You don't think so? I'll admit only a selfish fascination, Gregor. They interact with the fundamental structure of the universe. As you might well appreciate, any talent for living or perceiving beyond one's physical body is attractive to me. My work has... He broke off. Gideon? I wanted to learn something of the way their minds witness reality, independent of their bodies. Their farseers, for example, have a kinesthetic sensibility that operates regardless of the restraints of time and space. We paused at the edge of a walkway and looked out across the misty nocturnal swamp. Glowing insects and airborne spores drifted in the air, their paths occasionally punctuated by the sudden swoops of aerial night hunters. Sinuous things moved through the glistening water below the floating walkways, barely disturbing the oily surface. I've said too much, he murmured. You do not need to be guarded with me, Gideon. I will not judge you for seeking knowledge. I'm not the Puritan you once knew. I know. I would tell you if I could. But in order to learn certain things, I have been forced to make promises. To the Eldar? I cannot even confirm that. I am not proud of the promises, but I will honor them. Then what can you tell me? You said that things had been revealed to you. One of their kind has foreseen a great darkness ahead of us all. It is so abrupt and acute that it has twisted and altered the skeins of probability that the Eldar read. It was revealed to him in a sequence of connected visions. One of those was the destruction of the distaff. When that came true, I was shaken. It proved the visions were not fanciful. "What else has he seen?" I asked. "A living blade, a man-machine, bestriding a long-dead world and preparing to strike a blow that will spill human and Eldar blood alike," he said. After that, nothing. I looked down at him. Nothing. Nothing. That vision is the most distant thing he is now able to see. It's no more than 6 months from now. Beyond that, he has been unable to glimpse anything at all. Why? Because there is no future left to see. Chapter 17. Psychoarchaeology. Ghoul. The bark of the demon. Gideon's message to me proved that he already knew the name Kanyar the Sharp. But as we talked, I discovered he knew very little besides the name. Nail and I tracked the Janissaries after they fled Messina in an effort to discover who had hired them. It was well hidden. The Vesserine take great pains to protect the identity of their clients. There were false trails, payments from bogus accounts and via holding companies. But we wormed it out eventually. Kanyar the Sharp. Which meant what to you? Nothing. Except that he was the individual who had ordered the systematic destruction of your operation, and that his name featured prominently in a number of the Farseer's visions. We believe Kanyar and the man-machine from the climactic revelation are one and the same. Kanyar the Sharp is Pontius Glor, I said. He was astonished and excited. The revelations had said nothing of Glor. The Kanyar guys had masked his true identity from the Eldar. "Why target you?" he asked. "Self-preservation. I am one of the few people who knows he still exists. In fact, I'm sorry to say, he exists because of me. He was also searching for something that he believes I possess." "Like what?" I had no choice but to tell him everything. My dealings with Glor, Marla Tare, the Malus Codicium. "You weren't joking when you said you weren't the Puritan I once knew," he said. "Are you shocked?" "No, Gregor, I'm not. I believe radicalism is inevitable. We all become radicals eventually, as we appreciate that we must know our enemy in order to defeat him. The real dangers come from extreme Puritans. Puritanism is fueled by ignorance, and ignorance is the greatest peril of all. That's not to suggest the path of the radical is easy. Eventually, even the most careful and responsible radical will be overwhelmed by the warp. The real judge of character is what good a man can do for the Imperium before he is drawn too far. There is one other thing. In the mind of his daughter, there was an image of a desiccated world that closely matches the one you described from the Eldar revelations. There was a name connected with it. Ghoul. "Let me investigate that further," he said, and turned his force chair back down the walkway towards the camp. Ravener had brought me to that remote jungle world because Promedy had featured in another of the Eldar visions. Kanyar the Sharp had been there recently, perhaps as little as 6 weeks before. Ravener intended to find out why. Ravener's field team numbered about 10 individuals, several technicians, 6 astropaths, and an archaeologist called Kenza, the grey-haired man I had seen earlier. "But there are no ruins on Promedy," I remarked shortly after I had been introduced to him.
"Not anymore, sir," he agreed. "But there is compelling theory that Promedy was once one of several worlds inhabited by an ancient culture."
"How ancient?" He glanced at me nervously.
"Pre-dawn," he said.
A culture from before the rise of man. That was breathtaking. "So this compelling theory," I pressed, "this comes from the Eldar?" He didn't want to answer, but my rank gave him little option.
"Yes, sir. But this culture predates even them, and was quite dead long before even they came to the stars."
Ravener's technicians had spent their time since reaching Promedy conducting a survey with the assistance of the astropaths. They had studied the surface and atmosphere of the planet for signs of Kanyar's visit, looking for traces of landing sites, the residual pollution of vehicle exhausts, the echoes of human minds. They were certain now that the campsite on the bayou was close to the place where Kanyar made planetfall. Now the astropaths were preparing for an auto-seance on a scale greater than any I had ever attempted. Gideon called me to the force tent.
Ghoul is the name of a planet, he said.
The dead world in the vision?
Quite probably.
And where is it?
We don't know.
Who's we? Where did this information come from? He sighed.
Lord Seer,
he called. One of the inner screens drew aside, and a slim, very tall figure in a long, hooded robe stepped through from the privacy of the inner rooms. The robe was made of a gleaming blue material that flashed like shot silk, but seemed heavier and more fluid. There was a strange, unpleasantly sweet scent, like burnt sugar. I knew that hood would never be drawn back in my presence. I was not fit to see the face beneath.
"This is Eisenhorn,"
the figure said. It wasn't a question. The words flowed melodically with a strange cadence that no human could ever approximate. "Who am I addressing?" I said.
"The book is in his coat,"
the figure said to Ravenel, ignoring me.
"An insult that he carries it so casually."
Gregor? I took the Malus Codicium from my pocket. The figure made a warding gesture with its gloved right hand. "It's an insult that your friend will have to tolerate, I'm afraid," I said. "This isn't leaving my person."
It has contaminated him. It smolders in his blood. It has yoked him to demons.
"And more beside, no doubt," I countered. "But take one look into my mind and tell me I'm not dedicated to the salvation of all of us." I dropped my psi shield provocatively, but though I could sense the Eldar's temptation to look, he did not touch my mind.
Ravenel vouches for you,
the hooded figure said after a moment.
I will content myself with that. Do not come any closer.
"So what do I call you?"
"You won't have any need to,"
the Eldar replied bluntly. "Please," Gideon cut in. He was clearly very uncomfortable. "Gregor, you may refer to my guest as Lord Seer. My lord, perhaps you could tell Gregor about Ghoul."
In the first days, a race came from the Maelstrom and raised settlements in this space. 7 worlds they made, and the greatest of these was Ghoul. Then they were overturned and left no trace behind.
"From the Maelstrom? From the Warp? You mean a demon race?" The Lord Seer said nothing. "Are you saying demons once colonized 7 worlds in our reality?"
They fled a war. Their king was dead, and they carried his body for burial. On his tomb, they raised the first city, and then made 6 worlds around it, to honor his rest forever.
"Ghoul is the tomb of a demon king." There was no response. "What? Are you just going to answer every other question? Is Ghoul the tomb world? Is that what Glor is after? The tomb of a demon?"
I have not seen the answer,
said the Eldar. "Then take a wild guess."
The demon king is dead. Kanyar cannot hope to raise him.
"Unless he has the Malus Codicium," I said.
Not even then.
"So what then?" I snapped. "Traditionally," Gideon put in. "In human culture, anyway, a king is buried with great treasures and artifacts beside him. So there's something in this tomb. Something so valuable that the Malus Codicium is just a key to get it. Where is Ghoul?" "We don't know," said Ravenel. "Does Glor know?" "I think that's why he was here." The Eldar withdrew, and I was glad to be out of his presence. I found it hard to know how Ravenel tolerated him. Outside, the final preparations were being made. All of Ravenel's people, except Kenza and the 6 astropaths, were withdrawing to his ship. Nail and Kara were going to the SN.
"A message from Maxilla,"
Nail said to me.
"You've had a communique from Fishig."
"Fishig? Really?"
"It seems he's changed his mind, that he regrets his clash with you and wants to come back."
"I think it's too late for that, Harlon." Nail shrugged.
Cut him some slack, I say, boss. You know how hardline he is. He's had time to think about things. Get his head around stuff. Let him come back. From what Gideon's been saying, we could probably use him.
No. Later, maybe. Not now. I don't think I can trust him.
He probably thinks the same thing about you,
Grinned Nail.
Joke,
He added, raising his hands to pacify me.
Good luck.
He finished, then walked off to the shuttle, where Kara Swole was waiting. It was just dawn. Before their departure, the technicians had extended the anti-grav walkways to form a circular path across the bayou 50 meters in diameter. The astropaths spread out around the suspended walkways under the thick, steaming vegetation. I stood with Gideon and Kenza on one of the central sections. The evenly spaced astropaths began to murmur as they sank into their trances, and the air became charged with psychopathic energy. Instead of focusing on a single object, as Yekut Vance and I had done with Midas's jacket, the astropaths were opening the entire area up, conjuring its psychic traces. A cold blue glow began to spread around us, quite at odds with the light of the rising sun. Things became filmy and misty.
I see something, Kenza said.
So did I. Shapes, like clouds, writhing and forming above the water at the center of the circle. Nothing distinct. I felt Ravener reach out with his mind and fine-tune the coherence of the image. Just standing there beside him, I could feel how strong his mind had grown. My old pupil was frighteningly powerful. Suddenly, the image resolved. 3 figures wading through the bayou's knee-deep water. One, a massive Ogrin with a blaster cannon, followed in the splashing wake of a sturdy male human dressed in beige combat armor, his face hidden by a rebreather. This human was scanning the area with a handheld auspex. The 3rd figure was beside him. It was tall, broad, and moved with a strange stiffness, its body partially draped with what looked at first like a cape of feathers. They weren't feathers. They were blades, tongues of polished, sharpened metal interlaced into an armored garment. Beneath it, I could glimpse a body of burnished chrome, duralloy, and steel. A mechanical humanoid body of marvelous design. The work of Magos Geared Bure, I had no doubt. The late Geared Bure. This was Kanyar the Sharp, the man-machine, the living blade from the Eldar vision. Pontius Glor. I could see his face. It was the face of a beautiful young man with a mane of curled hair, but the hair didn't move, and the expression didn't alter from a curling smirk. It was a mask worked from gold, like the head of a noble gilded statue. I had seen the face before, in old records that showed Pontius Glor in his prime. There was no sound, but Glor said something to his point man. Then he turned and seemed to address someone or something we couldn't see. There was a long pause as they waited, and then the Ogrin shuffled back, as if alarmed by something. The point man set his auspex to close focus. Glor stood still, as if awestruck for a moment, then clapped his metal hands in delight.
I can't see what they're doing, Kenza said.
There's nothing there to see,
Gideon snapped in disappointment. That seemed to be the case. There was a faint visual distortion where the psychic ghost of the location failed to match its real counterpart exactly, but nothing else. No, I said suddenly. I think there is. Get your astropaths to widen the field of the seance. What? Gideon asked. Just do it. With a little effort, Ravener's telepaths managed to increase the diameter of the conjured scene. Almost at once, we were able to make out shadowy figures lurking around the edge. Psychers, said Gideon. Exactly, I said. The reason we can't see what he's up to is because he did what we're doing. An auto-seance. That's right. How did you guess, Gregor? Mr. Kenza here said there were no ancient remains on Promedy. Glor has to be looking for the past by other means. But we can't resolve what it is he's seeing.
Go back,
said a voice behind us. Silently, the Eldar seer had joined us on the walkway.
Go back,
he said again. It took a few minutes for the astropaths to compose themselves and re-establish the image. Now I could feel the Eldar's mental strength supporting them. We watched as the scene replayed. The 3 figures approached us just as before. Glor conversed with his point man, and then called back to his psychers. The world changed. There was no jungle, no water. Great, smooth cliffs of rock blocked out the sky. Stone columns like giant fir trees towered over us. We were seeing what Glor's psychers had allowed him to see. The surface of Promedy as it had been eons before the age of man. A cyclopean city of glassy black rock that had long since vanished so completely only its psychic phantom remained. "God, Emperor!" Kenza gasped and collapsed in a faint. It was terrifying, mesmeric. The scale was so big. We felt like microbes or motes of dust on the streets of an imperial hive. I stared, fascinated. Now, when the Ogrin shuffled back in fear and Glor stood awestruck, I could see why. Glor clapped his hands in delight, and the point man began scanning a wide section of the ghostly wall with his auspex. "There's an inscription," Ravener cried. I leapt off the walkway and waded through the oily water until I was beside the images of Glor and his men. "We need to get this before it fades," I shouted. Ravener flew his chair in over the water to join me. Recording sensors in his chair began to whir and store the images. They were written in a language I had never seen before. It made me sick to look at it. There was no linear form. It simply spiraled and meandered up across the massive wall face, looping and circling. I felt dizzy. Glor was capering and dancing like a lunatic, his machine body lurching and awkward. The light around us began to wink and flicker. "We're losing it," said Ravener. "Probably time we did," I said, stumbling back towards the walkway. The colossal city melted away. Then Glor and his companions vanished, and blue light ebbed away. Ravener's telepaths were slumped on the walkways, exhausted. The Eldar stood, head bowed. It looked like a chart.
"It was a chart," said the Eldar. "A plan of the 7 worlds. And it was the location of Ghoul."
Pontius Glor knew where he was going. He'd known for some weeks. He might already have arrived. It took Ravener and the Lord Seer about a day to make sense of the findings. Allowing for precession and sidereal shifts as best they could, considering the vast passage of time involved, they determined that the world known before the time of man as Ghoul was in an uncharted system designated 5213X, 3 months outside Imperial space and 20 weeks from our current location. We made preparation to break orbit the following night. Ravener explained to me that the Eldar had requested to be taken to a secret location en route, where he could access something called a warp tunnel. Ravener was beholden to him. We agreed to rendezvous at Giganda, 3 weeks short of 5213X, prior to the final leg of our chase. "Do we inform the Ordos?" Ravener asked. "No. What strength they could lend us would be outweighed by problems they'd cause. I will prepare a full documented account of everything we know to be transmitted back in the event that we fail," I finished. Before we departed, I dared to visit Ravener's ship, the Hinterlight. I took Crezia and Harlan Nail with me. Medicae and Tribus showed us to the low-lit chamber of the starship's infirmary where Elizabeth lay, inside a softly glowing stasis field. Crezia and Harlan hung back by the hatchway. Elizabeth looked like she was asleep. Her skin was as pale as the snows of the high Atanates. "Is she alive?" I asked Antribus. "Yes, sir. I mean, without these vital supports, the stasis field. If we shut them down, she may remain the way she is, but she might also fade. It is never easy to tell in cases of such significant injury." "Will she recover?" I asked. "No," he said, caring enough to look me in the eyes. "Except for some miracle. She will never regain consciousness or mobility." "So she's dead to us. Has she any quality of life?" "Who can say, sir? She is not in any pain. I believe she is dreaming an endless, tranquil dream. If you consider that to be cruel, we can disconnect the machines and let nature take its course." He withdrew. Crezia appeared at my side. "What are you going to do, Gregor?" she asked. "I won't turn the machines off. Not yet. My mind's too full of that bastard Glor. I'll make a decision afterwards. If there is an afterwards, I thought. I'd like you and Nail to stay with her. Look after her. Will you do that?
Of course, she said.
I realized this was the first time she'd ever set eyes on Elizabeth Beckwin. Really? It's a big thing to ask of you.
I'm a doctor, and your friend, Gregor. It's not a big thing. I turned to go. She can probably hear you, she said suddenly.
Do you think so? Cressier shrugged and smiled.
I don't know. There's every chance she can. And if she can't, does it matter?
Does what matter?
Tell her, Gregor. Now, before you go. Tell her, for goodness sake. Do the right thing by one of us at least.
She left me alone, and I sat down beside Elizabeth's cot. And then, though I don't know to this day if she ever heard or understood, I told her all the things I should have told her years before. I said goodbye to Ravener and promised to wait for him at Jaganda. I kissed Cressier goodbye and went to the Hinterlight's hangar to cross back to the SN. Nail came to see me off. I shook his hand. Keep an eye on Gideon, I said. He frowned. You don't trust him? He asked. With my life. But I don't trust his friends. As the SN pulled away from Promedy, gathering speed as it headed for the Immaterium translation point Maxilla's navigator had calculated, I went to find Amos. He was in his suite of rooms, puzzling his way through a deep stack of books he'd borrowed from Maxilla's library. Something else to divert you, I said, handing him a pile of data slates and record tiles. Before we had parted company, Ravener had copied for me everything he had been permitted to copy, including a picked file of the inscription, as his force chair's sensors had recorded it. Gideon has marked some key passages in his notes to get you up to speed, but the inscription, which is a chart, is what really interests me. Gideon's associate told me what it means, or the part of it that applies to Ghoul, anyway. I'd like to know a little more, in literal terms.
You want me to decipher an alien text that was long dead before man appeared?
Put like that, it was a tall order. There are some other samples of the same script that Ravener obtained from other sites. I don't know, do what you can with it. Anything you can turn up will be useful. The voyage to Jaganda was not the longest I have ever undertaken, but it felt like it. I was fretful and ill at ease, impatient to arrive. My mind would not stop thinking about Glor's head start, or how close the far-seer's nothingness loomed. To fill the time, I meditated and exercised, burrowed my way through Maxilla's library in search of anything pertaining to the Eldar and their legends. Kara worked to get Medea up to fitness, and, after 2 weeks, the three of us were running through demanding combat training each day. Sometimes Alina joined us for the lighter sessions to keep in shape. I was glad I had an untouchable with me, given our destination and Glor's abilities. Except for Elizabeth, who didn't really count under the circumstances, Alina was the last living member of the distaff. I wondered if I would ever recruit and build it again. I wondered if I would even get the chance. During the 3rd week, Amos called me to his suite to discuss his findings so far. I wondered why he hadn't simply told me over dinner. We all met for a meal each evening anyway. He told me he was making progress. The ancient culture which had built Ghoul appeared indirectly in several old sources. It seems that early Imperial explorers had known myths of a dead precursor race from some of their first contacts with Xenos species, though Amos was concerned that some of the references could be to other dead cultures or to species that had migrated or transplanted themselves. One theme emerged. The race of Ghoul were marked as others or outsiders because they had not originated in our galaxy. The name Ghoul itself didn't appear anywhere.
One minor culture, the Doi of Mitas, have a legend concerning the Zol Zonzoi, demons who ruled once and would return. The word meant warped ones.
A good enough description as any? The Eldar seemed convinced that the culture was a colony of demons from the warp. Not even a race in its own right, more a host, an army, a nation, an exiled demon king and his followers, perhaps.
There are a few more bits and pieces, not much. I'm getting nowhere with the inscription, though it is extraordinary, and Gideon's footage of that séance most perturbatory. I'd like to borrow your book.
Your what?
Your damned book. I use the adjective advisedly. You said you never wanted to see it again, I reminded him. I don't, Gregor. It chills me to know it is even on board. But what chills me more is what we're going out there to find. And you've asked me to do a job. And that's the only tool available to me that I haven't used. I took the Malus Codicium from my pocket. For a moment I couldn't bring myself to pass it to him. Be careful, I hissed. I know the procedures, he said grumpily. You've had me study prohibited texts before. Not like this one. I kept an eye on Amos after that, visiting him regularly and making sure he came to meals. He became tired and short-tempered. I wanted to take the book away from him, but he said he was nearly done. We were a week from Juganda when he finished his work. It's incomplete, he warned, but the main elements are there. He seemed even more fatigued than before, and had developed a slight shake on his left side. His suite was a mess of papers and slates, notes and scrawlings, scattered books. In places where he had apparently run out of paper, he had continued his notes on tabletops or even walls. Uber Amos had performed his greatest work of service for me, the hardest task I had ever set him. And it had cost him. It had damaged his health and, I was afraid, his sanity. The Demon King, he said, spreading out a large sheet of scribbled-on vellum across the litter on his desk, who is represented by this glyph here. He pointed with a palsied finger. And by this triple formation of symbols here was called Amos? Isaril. He all but had to spit the word out of his mouth to make the sound. The gilded clock on the table beside his unmade bed chimed twice suddenly, for no reason. It keeps doing that, Amos growled crossly. His finger stabbed another mark on the paper for me to look at, and then traced down a curling line of script. His notes, I realized, had taken the form of the chart itself. Here, look. There was a war. The Demon King... Just call him the Demon King. The Demon King fought a war of staggering enmity with a rival. The rival's name is not given, but from the marking here, I would guess it was one of what we tentatively understand to be the 4 primary powers of chaos, although it seems there were only 3 at that time. I wonder why. I couldn't answer that. I wondered if the Farseer could. The rival is described as a foul sorcerer, Amos continued. I don't pretend or want to know the hierarchies of the warp, but in simple terms, damn it! Isaril was a lieutenant, a warlord, a prince, whatever you want to call it, who tried to usurp the place of this primary power. Amos unrolled another crumpled sheet and wiped pencil shavings off it. The war lasted 1 billion years, as we would understand it. The Demon King was destroyed by his rival, killed outright. His host fled in terror at this crushing defeat and sought sanctuary in the material universe. Our universe. There they established a capital and 6 kindred colonies. The capital, Ghoul, was built upon the Demon King's mausoleum, which was itself constructed around his bark. His bark? I suppose they mean his ship. The word is closer to chariot or galley in literal terms. And I think this may be the key point. The bark was his war machine, the craft that he rode into battle. It is described here, and also here, as being of such power and might that the warped ones who wrote this were themselves staggered by it. He looked at me. The bark of the Demon King, a weapon of inconceivable power that lies entombed in the mausoleum of Ghoul. That prize, so I am told, is what Glor is after. Told? He started, shaking his head. I'm tired. I meant that's what I've learned from this. My work. You said told. I did not. Distinctly. Yes, well, I did. Because I used the wrong word. Learned. That's what I have learned. I put my hand on his shoulder, reassuringly, but he flinched. Amos, you've done an extraordinary job with this. I've asked a lot of you. Yes, you have. Too much. I serve you, sir. It is never too much. I'll have Maxilla prepare another room for you. You can't sleep in here. I'm used to the clutter, he said. It's not the clutter I'm worried about. He shuffled away, muttering. I need to take the book back now, I said. It's here somewhere, he said, offhand. I'll bring it to you later.
I'll take it now. He glared at me. Now, please, I repeated. He pulled the Malus Codicium from under a pile of notes that fluttered onto the carpet and held it out. I took hold, but he would not let go. Amos. I managed to yank the book away. The clock mischimed again.
I think you should consider your options, Gregor, he said.
What do you mean?
The powers we face are great. Too great, perhaps. We are woefully under strength. I think we should be stronger.
How do you propose we do that?
Summon the demon host.
What? He took off his heavy augmetic eyeglasses and polished the lenses with the corner of his robe. His hands were shaking badly now.
I didn't approve before, Hondura, but I think I grasp things a little better now. I understand the choices you've made, the rules you've bent, all for the good, and I apologize for ever doubting you. With the demon host we might stand a chance. Summon it here.
How? He became agitated with me.
Like you did on Mickwal.
That was sheer desperation, I reproved.
We're desperate now.
And we have no host to summon it into.
You didn't then.
And it nearly killed us with its raw power before I could trap it.
Then use one of Maxilla's astropaths as a host.
I stared at him levelly. I won't kill a man just to provide a host.
You did on Mickwal,
he hissed softly.
What did you say? You did on Mickwal. Vervuk wasn't dead. You sacrificed him for the good of us all. Why would you flinch from doing it again?
Why would I do again something I wish had never happened?
Are we not playing for the highest stakes? One life, sir. What is that compared to the millions that may die if Glor succeeds? Summon the demon host. Summon Cherubbaal to help us.
I walked slowly to the door. Get some rest, I said with forced lightness. You'll feel better for it. You'll have changed your mind.
Whatever, he said,
turning away dismissively. He was entirely unprepared for the will I unleashed at him. What did it say to you? I commanded. Amos cried out and his legs gave way. He crashed to the deck and half overturned a table in his efforts to stay upright. His papers avalanched onto the floor. It told you, didn't it? It told you. You damn fool, Uber, what did you do?
I couldn't crack the code, he wailed. The language was beyond me. But there was so much more in that book. That beautiful book. I realized I could do more.
You spoke to the demon host.
No.
Then how else would you know its name? Because I sure as hell never told you. He shrieked out and staggered back to his feet, his face locked in a grimace of pain and shame and fear.
It was there in the pages, he cried. Close, like a whisper in my ear. So soft. It said it could help. It said it would tell me everything I needed if I could only arrange its release.
Oh, God, Emperor. Everything you've told me today you learned from that bastard thing, Cherubbaal.
It was true, he screamed. True! Isaril! Isaril!
The clock began to chime furiously. A glass pitcher and 3 tumblers on the bureau shattered. One lens of Amos's eyeglasses cracked clean across. He collapsed onto the floor. I summoned servitors and took him to the sickbay. For safety, we locked him in an isolation bed. His safety, and ours. The damn clock was still chiming when I went back to his room to burn the papers. Chapter 18. Meeting at Jaganda. Misplaced loyalties. To the last. To the death. Amos. All that last week of travel, he was my primary concern. I kept a watch on him in the infirmary, but he was generally unresponsive. He woke a few hours after the confrontation, and then said nothing. He refused to eat at first, and remained awake day and night, staring at the locked door of the isolation chamber. I dearly wished I hadn't had to lock it. After a day he took food and drink, but remained silent. We all attempted to get some reaction from him. Both Medea and Maxilla tried for hours at a time. By the time we reached Jaganda, a day ahead of schedule, our mood was low. I had never realized before then how central to our team spirit Amos had been. We all missed him. We all hated what had happened. I hated myself for allowing it. Amos had been careless where I should have been able to trust him, but even so, it was my doing. I hated myself. And I hated Cherubale, whose baleful influence had been cursing my life for too long. I wondered if I could ever, be free of it. I made a resolution. If I lived, if I vanquished Glor, I would destroy the Malus Codicium and then return to Gudrun and destroy Cherubale. I would take off my runestaff and annihilate it, just as I had annihilated its kin, Profanity, on Farnes Beta. Giganda's system is dominated by a huge ringed gas giant. In orbit above it is a semi-automated way station established and maintained by a consortium of trade guilds and navigator houses as a stopover and service facility. The SN coasted in. There was no sign of any other vessels. Maxilla made contact with the station master, and a drone tug led us into one of the wide docking gantries that extended from the rim of the dish-shaped station. I crossed via the air gate with Maxilla and Medea, and we were met by the master, a hirsute, sluggish man called O'Keen. He ran the place with a staff of 4. It was a 20-month contract, he explained, and then they stood down in favor of a fresh crew. They didn't get many visitors, he told us. They'd be happy to resupply the SN's technical needs for a competitive price, he told us. He told us plenty. Isolation does terrible things to men's minds. We couldn't shut him up. I finally left him with Maxilla. Maxilla could talk too. Medea and I went to the station's central hub to see if the resident astropath had received any messages for us from Gideon. It was a dismal place of rotting and poorly maintained hallways and dark hangars. There was a background smell that I decided was spoiled meat, and Medea maintained was stale lactose. It turned out that, despite O'Keen's non-stop chatter, there was one thing he hadn't told us. Someone was waiting for us in the recreation lounge. "Gregor!" Fishig rose to his feet from a threadbare couch. He was dressed in black with a waist-length shipboard cape of dark red wire-shot fully that was secured at his throat with a small silver inquisitorial crest. I faced him across the room. "What are you doing here, Godwin?" "Waiting for you, Gregor. Waiting for a chance to make things right." "And how do you propose doing that?" He shrugged. It was an open, relaxed, almost apologetic gesture. "I said things I shouldn't have. Judged you too quickly. I always was a hard-nosed idiot. You'd think my years of service with you might have taught me the error." "You'd think," quipped Medea. I held up a warning finger to silence her. "You made your feelings perfectly clear on hubris, Fishig. I'm not sure we can work together anymore. There's a mutual lack of trust." "Which I want to do away with," he said. I'd never heard him so calm or sincere. "Godwin, you questioned my purity, branded some of my actions heretical, and then offered to redeem me." "I was drunk for that last part," he said, with a tiny flash of smile. "Yes, you were. And what are you now? Here? Willing? Reconciled?" "Well," I said, "let's start with the here part. How the hell did you know I'd be here?" He paused. I looked round slowly at Medea, who was studying the deck. "You told him where I'd be, didn't you?" Didn't you?" She snapped round to face me, every bit as haughty and rebellious as her dear, damned father. "All right, I did. Okay? We need Fishig." "Maybe we don't, girl." "Don't girl me, you bastard. He's one of us. One of the band. He kept sending to the ship. Sending and sending. You wouldn't listen to him. So I replied. Nail told me he'd sent one message." "Yeah," she said snidely. "And Nail told me what you'd sent back. The big brush-off. To a man who's devoted his life to you. A man who got a bit angry with you and then thought about it and regretted it. Fishig wants to make amends. He wants to be with us again. Haven't you ever regretted anything? More than you can possibly imagine, Medea. But you should have told me." "I asked her not to," Fishig said. "I imagined how you'd react. I'm grateful Medea thought so highly of me. Could you not find it in you to trust me again? Trust me like she does?" "Quite possibly. But I wanted to do it on my terms, when I was ready. There's too much going on just now.
Oh, come on, implored Medea.
How did you get here? I asked Fishig sharply.
I got passage on a tramp trader. It dropped me off here a week ago.
I had asked the question so I could test his reply and get a measure of his veracity. As he answered, and I probed delicately out with my mind, I found the last thing I was expecting.
Why are you psi-shielded? I asked.
Just a precaution, he said. Against what? I demanded. Against this moment, Fishig said. There was true anguish in his eyes. He drew the compact bolt pistol out from under his cape. Fishig! Medea howled in horror. Barbarisata was already in my hands, humming. Don't be a fool, I said.
He'd only be a fool if he was doing this alone.
The words were not vocal. They were burning wires of psychic venom wrapped around a monstrous cudgel of mental force that smashed into the back of my skull. I stumbled forward, half blind. Medea fell over hard, totally unconscious. I saw figures emerging from the doorways off the lounge space all around. 5, 6, more. Men dressed in the hooded burgundy armor of an inquisitor's personal retinue, their chest plates decorated with gold leaf in the form of the Inquisition's crest. 2 of them grabbed me and ripped the force sword from my slack fingers. The others aimed their weapons at me. "Don't hurt him! Don't hurt him!" Fishig cried. The guards dragged me round to face an individual emerging from the lounge's greasy kitchenette area. I saw a tall man in black armor and robes, with a monstrous face that had been surgically deformed to inspire fear and loathing. It was equine, snouted, with a mouth full of blunt teeth and dark pools for eyes. Fiber wire and fluid tubes formed gleaming ropes across the back of his skull. He'd once been the pupil and interrogator of my old, long-dead ally Commodus Voke. Now he was an inquisitor in his own right.
Eisenhorn, how simply vile to see you again,
said Golesh Constantine Phepos Heldane. The guards dragged Medea and me back on board the SN. I was still dazed. I could hear Fishig begging Heldane to order his men to be more careful with us. Oh, what a mistake Fishig had made. As we were bundled through the station's docking gantries, I saw the sleek black shape of an inquisitorial cruiser now occupying the dock station next to the SN. Heldane's ship. It had probably lain concealed in the atmosphere of the gas giant until the trap was sprung. They took us into the main stateroom. Heldane's men, and I guess there must have been a full detachment, had secured the SN.
How many travelers with you?
Heldane snapped at me. I made no answer.
How many?
He repeated, following his words with a blade of psi pain that made me cry out. I needed to concentrate. I needed to rebuild my mental defenses. Feigning injury, I looked around and took stock. Maxilla stood nearby, surrounded by guards, glowering. Elena was sitting bolt upright and pale on a couch. Medea was sprawled on the floor, just waking up. There was no sign of Amos or Kara.
4, said Maxilla. These 4. The rest are my crew. Servitors, all of them. Slaved into my ship.
He was playing the part of the innocent shipmaster, outraged at the invasion of his vessel, distancing himself from his troublesome passengers. But I knew he was frightened.
You're lying, I can tell,
said Heldane, pacing round Maxilla.
Your defenses are good, I'll grant you that, shipmaster. Don't lie to me.
I'm not, Maxilla began, and then cried out in pain.
Don't lie to me.
Leave him alone, Fishig boomed. He's just the captain. The shipmaster, like you said, he's not part of this. Heldane looked round at Fishig with a withering stare.
You made this happen, Chastener. You came to the Ordos and begged us to save your dear heretical master from damnation. Well, that's what I'm doing. So shut your mouth and let me get on with it. Or would you rather I probe the minds of these delicious young ladies?
No.
Good, because the shipmaster is rather interesting. He's not altogether human, is he? Are you, Tobias Maxilla? Your defenses are admirable, but only because your brain isn't entirely organic. You're so much a machine, sir, you hardly deserve the title man, do you?
Look who's talking, Maxilla said bravely. I felt the sigh surge from across the room, and it made me wince. Haldane's inhuman features folded into an angry animal roar, and Maxilla stumbled, cried out, and fell to his knees. Showers of sparks exploding from burned-out servos in his neck, right shoulder, and right wrist.
"Now you will answer, metal man," Haldane leered at Maxilla, "or shall I burn out another part of your blasphemous body?"
"There are 5, I said loudly. 5 of us."
"Aha! The heretic speaks."
Haldane switched round to face me, his attention drawn from Maxilla, at least for a moment. "The other member of my party is my savant, Amos. I'm sure you remember him. He's in the infirmary."
"How very obliging of you, Gregor,"
Haldane said. I prayed that I had outwitted him. Haldane could undoubtedly feel from our minds that someone was missing. If I showed him Amos, I hoped he would be satisfied and miss Kara entirely. I would advise you to leave him there.
"Why?"
There was an accident, I said. He is damaged."
"Warp damaged?"
"No, he will recover."
"But he is infirm because of contact with the warp."
"No." Haldane turned to a couple of his men.
"Go to the infirmary. Locate this man. Kill him and incinerate his remains."
"God, Emperor, no!" I cried. I tried to get up, tried to reach out with my mind to wrest Barbarisata from Haldane's hands. I was too weak, and he was too strong. Another psychic assault smashed me to the floor. "Is everything all right?" a new voice asked. "There was a lot of unseemly shouting just then."
"Everything's fine, my lord. Welcome aboard,"
I heard Haldane say. I rolled over and saw the newcomer enter the SN stateroom. He was resplendent in his brass power armor, his augmetic jaw as stubbornly set as the last time I had seen him. "Ozma," I whispered. "Grand Master Ozma of the Ordos Helicon, if you don't mind," he said sourly. He had been elevated. Orsini was dead, and Leonid Ozma had finally achieved the rank he had spent his life chasing. So much had happened in the Helicon subsector since I had become preoccupied with running and staying alive. Ozma, my nemesis, the man who had once tried to have me declared extremis diabolus, and who had imprisoned me, tortured and hunted me, had now become the master of the Ordos Helicon and my supreme overlord. The guards dragged me up onto the mezzanine area of the SN stateroom and sat me in one of the chairs facing the long banquet table. They stood back, and Ozma and Haldane approached. Ozma was holding Barbarisata and studying the intricate workings of the blade. His own huge power hammer was anchored to his belt. Haldane sat down facing me.
"There's no love lost between us, Eisenhorn. I won't insult you by pretending there is. Make things easy for all of us. Confess."
"Confess what?" "Your heresy," said Ozma. "I am not a heretic, and this is not a tribunal of my peers. I cannot be judged so." I knew damn well I could. Grand Master or no Grand Master, Ozma could deal with me however the hell he wanted. "Confess," he said again, sitting down in the seat next to Haldane with a whine of armor servos. He really was fascinated by Barbarisata, turning it over in his gauntleted hands. "Confess what?"
"We have a list of charges,"
Haldane said, producing a data slate from his cloak.
"Your man Fischig was very specific about his concerns. You have consorted with demons, and conjured one of them as a demon host on more than one occasion. You have hidden prescribed texts from the Inquisition. You have shielded a known heretic from the Inquisition and allowed him to roam free."
I fixed Haldane with a hard stare. "You mean Pontius Glor? I'll admit nothing, but I'll tell you this much. If you detain me here, you'll pay a much greater price than you can ever imagine. I am sworn to stop Pontius Glor, and you are preventing me from performing my holy duties." "Your days of performing holy duties are long gone," said Ozma.
"Where is the Malus Codicium?"
Haldane asked. I toughened my mind shield, hoping against hope that the simple surface truth would not get out. "In my pocket. In my damn pocket. Your men searched me for weapons, but they didn't bother about a battered old book in my coat." Haldane didn't read it.
"He's still wonderfully resilient,"
he told Ozma. They were assuming the Codicium would be in a secure place. A void safe, a strongbox, under my damn mattress. They had no idea it would be right there in front of them, covered only by a layer of leather coat. I had to keep that simple, stupid fact from them. Millions will die. Tens of millions, perhaps, if you don't let me finish my work. That's what they all say, said Ozma. He rose and leaned over at me, his blunt, grizzled face looming close. You're going to burn, Eisenhorn. Burn and suffer. I am only Grand Master today because I have never suffered heretics like you. You are the worst kind of fool.
Tell us about the demon host, said Haldane. Where is it secured? How can we find it? What are its command words?
Command words, I replied. Why would you need those? Do you intend to control the demon host yourself? Haldane sat back and glanced at Ozma. Of course they don't, said Fishig, who had been lurking on the mezzanine steps. They're not heretics like you. They wouldn't. He looked round at Ozma and Haldane. You don't want the demon host, do you, masters? It must be contained and dealt with, said Ozma. Leave this business to your superiors, please. You interrupt too much. But the demon host, you talk like you want it for yourselves. Ozma glanced at the long-snouted inquisitor. Haldane, tell this man to go away. He's served his purpose. Go, Fishig, Haldane snapped, and my former friend descended the stairs and sat down on one of the couches, gazing at Alina and Medea, who were trying to make Maxilla comfortable. The demon host, Haldane rasped. Give it to us. And you call me a heretic? Haldane's psychic slap rocked me back in my seat. A guard approached Ozma. We have searched the infirmary, Lord. There is no one there. Thank the Emperor, I thought. Kara has freed Amos.
Kara?
Said Haldane suddenly.
Who is Kara?
No one, I willed.
There is a sixth person aboard, Haldane told Ozma. Probably now working with the Savant.
Find them, Ozma snapped, and half of his guard unit hurried from the stateroom. Bring more squads across from our ship if you have to. There was a jolt, followed by a terrible raking squeal of metal on metal from somewhere outside.
What was that?
Haldane demanded. He got up and hurried down the steps towards the entrance to the main bridge. The SN jolted again. Ozma rose and pointed the tip of Barbarisator at me. Move, he ordered. Watch the rest of them, he told the guard captain. We followed Haldane onto the bridge. Fishig joined us, along with Maxilla, who was being held upright by a guard. We were listing badly. On the main screen we could see a forward view of the way station. The SN had disengaged from its moorings and was slowly tearing backwards away from the dock. Docking gantries were grinding and buckling against the ship's hull. What have you done? Ozma said to me. This is none of my doing, I replied. A series of minor explosions ripped through the control stations on the right-hand side of the huge bridge area, showering the marble floor with sparks and machine part debris. Another blast rocked the starboard chapel annex that contained the astropathic vault and buckled the hatch. A helm servitor combusted and toppled over, smashing open its sculptural golden casing. Sabotage, said Ozma. Haldane turned on Maxilla.
Your handiwork.
Mine, said Maxilla. Why the hell would I risk damage to my precious ship just to help these criminals? They mean nothing to me.
You're lying, you metal freak,
Haldane barked and grabbed Maxilla by the throat, lifting him off the ground.
Tell us what you've done. Put it right. Get your crew to stabilize the ship.
I've done nothing, Maxilla choked. Haldane hurled him across the chamber. The Inquisitor was strong by any standards, but he supplemented his physical strength with telekinesis. Maxilla hit the wall with a terrible splintering impact, and Haldane held him there with his powers for an awful moment, squashing him against the duralloy with his mind. There were several loud cracks of bone and metal. Then he let him go, and the limp, broken body of Tobias Maxilla fell to the marble deck and lay still.
Why did you do that?
Fishig cried.
Shut the hell up, you idiot!
Haldane answered.
We need to get this vessel locked down.
Fishig and one of the guards took a few steps forward towards the main bridge consoles. Fishig knew the SN. He probably thought he could access the thrusters and level us out before the dock gantries did any more damage to the hull. The astropathic vault blew out in a sheet of white flame that atomized two of the helm stations and threw Fishig and the guard off their feet. Screaming and writhing, incandescent with green tongues of fire that washed across its naked, contorting body, A figure levitated out of the burning vault. But it wasn't screaming. It was laughing. It was Cherubael.